All right, find a comfortable spot and let the sounds of your room be the only ones that matter. Let your shoulders relax and let the noise and hustle of the day begin to feel very far away. We're going on a little trip tonight, a quiet journey of the mind. We're going to look up at that vast starry sky, but we're going to look at it from a slightly different angle. We often see space as this beautiful, glittering canvas, a place of silent majesty and grand adventure, of heroes and discovery. And it is all of those things, but it is also, and perhaps more profoundly, the most challenging and unforgiving environment we have ever tried to enter. The story of space exploration isn't just one of triumph, it's a quiet, patient story of solving some of the most difficult problems you can possibly imagine. But we're not going to treat these problems like a scary list of dangers designed to keep you awake. Instead, let's think of them as great puzzles, immense cosmic hurdles that require incredible cleverness, patience, and quiet determination to overcome. Understanding these challenges doesn't make space any less magical. In a way, it makes the small successes we've had even more profound, more miraculous, and more awe-inspiring. So tonight, let's take a gentle journey through the hurdles we face when we try to leave the gentle embrace of our homeworld and venture out into that quiet, starry ocean. The first, and arguably the biggest hurdle, is the one we face before we even go anywhere. It's the simple, brute force problem of just getting off the ground. We live at the bottom of a deep gravity well. It's a beautiful concept. Imagine the fabric of space-time is a huge, flat rubber sheet. A massive object, like our planet, creates a deep depression in that sheet, like a heavy bowling ball. We live right at the bottom of that depression. To get out into the flat part of the sheet, into space, we have to climb up the incredibly steep sides of that well. And that climb requires a truly astonishing amount of energy. This leads us to the first great tyrannical law of space travel, a piece of math first figured out by a brilliant Russian pioneer named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky way back in 1903. It's called the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation, and it is both the key to spaceflight and its most stubborn gatekeeper. The equation is elegant but utterly ruthless. In simple terms, it says that to get your spacecraft moving faster, you need to throw mass out the back at high speed. That is, you need rocket fuel. But here's the cruel twist. That fuel itself has weight. So to go faster, you need more fuel. But to lift that extra fuel, you need even more fuel. And then you need more fuel to lift that fuel. It's a vicious, compounding cycle. It's why a giant rocket like the Saturn V that went to the moon, or a modern SpaceX Falcon Heavy, is mostly just a gigantic flying fuel tank. The actual payload, the part we care about with the astronauts or the satellite, is a tiny, tiny fraction of the rocket's total weight at liftoff. For many missions, the useful payload is only 2 or 3% of the total mass. The other 97% is just the machinery and the massive tanks of propellant needed to get that tiny payload off the ground and up to speed. It's like having to drive a car that's 97% gas tank and 3% everything else. Every single gram of weight on a spacecraft has to be justified, agonized over, and accounted for, because launching it
costs a fortune in both money and, more fundamentally, in fuel. This is the tyranny of the rocket equation. It's a constant battle against the crushing weight of your own potential. The fuel itself comes in different flavors, each with its own set of challenges. Some rockets use solid rocket boosters, which are essentially giant, powerful fireworks. They are relatively simple and provide immense thrust, but once you light them, you can't turn them off. Other rockets use liquid propellants, which are more complex but offer more control. You have your cryogenic fuels, like liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, which are incredibly powerful but have to be kept at unimaginably cold temperatures, constantly threatening to boil away. Then you have hypergolic propellants, a scary but useful type of fuel and oxidizer that ignite spontaneously the moment they touch each other. They're reliable, but they are also incredibly toxic and corrosive. Choosing your fuel is choosing your poison, in a way. So once you have your giant fuel tank with a tiny capsule on top, you have to get it moving. The launch itself is a marvel of controlled violence. It's the process of releasing an enormous amount of energy in a very precise way, all while balanced on a narrow column of fire. As the rocket climbs through the atmosphere, it faces a moment of incredible stress called max Q, or maximum dynamic pressure. This is the point where the combination of the rocket's increasing speed and the density of the air around it creates the most intense physical force on the vehicle, trying to bend it and rip it apart. It has to be built just strong enough to survive this single critical moment, but not so heavy that it can't get off the ground. It's an engineer's tightrope walk.
The goal of all this fire, fury, and careful engineering is to achieve orbital velocity. It's a common misconception that you just go up into space. If you just went straight up and shut off your engines, you would fall straight back down. To stay in space, you have to go sideways incredibly fast. So fast, in fact, that as gravity pulls you back down towards the Earth, you are moving so fast horizontally that you constantly miss it. That's what an orbit is, a state of perpetual falling, a continuous high-speed trip around the curve of the planet. Achieving that speed, about 28,000 kilometers per hour for low Earth orbit, requires a mind-boggling amount of energy. It's the first great filter of space exploration, the enormous energy barrier that separates our world from the one above. But let's imagine our astronauts have made it. They've survived the launch, their rocket performed perfectly, and they are now in a stable orbit, floating peacefully in weightlessness. The rules of the game now change completely. The challenges are no longer about explosive power and brute force. They become quieter, slower, more insidious, and in many ways much stranger. Let's imagine our crew is on a long journey, perhaps a 9-month trip to Mars. They have now entered the second great realm of problems, the challenge of the journey itself. They are now exposed to one of the most serious and unavoidable problems of long-duration spaceflight: cosmic radiation. Here on Earth, we live under a cozy, multi-layered shield. Our planet's molten iron core generates a powerful magnetic field that deflects the most energetic particles from the sun and deep space. What gets through that is then mostly absorbed by our thick atmosphere. It's the perfect combination of shields. In deep space, between the planets, there is no magnetic field to hide behind, and no atmosphere. There is no shield.
This radiation in deep space comes in two main flavors. The first is a constant, low-level, but deeply penetrating drizzle called galactic cosmic rays, or GCRs. These are not rays like light. They are actual physical particles, the hearts of atoms, protons, helium nuclei, and even heavier things like iron nuclei that have been stripped of all their electrons. They are the shrapnel from ancient, distant supernova explosions, and they have been accelerated by cosmic magnetic fields over millions of years until they are traveling at nearly the speed of light. They are tiny, but they are moving so fast and with so much energy that they can pass right through the metal hull of a spacecraft and right through an astronaut's body. As they do, they leave a trail of damage, like a microscopic cannonball tearing through tissue, breaking strands of DNA, and increasing the long-term risk of cancer and other health problems. You can't feel them, you can't see them, but they are passing through you constantly. It's like being in a steady, unavoidable drizzle of invisible, high-energy bullets. The second type of radiation is more sporadic, but can be even more immediately dangerous. These are solar particle events, or SPEs, usually tied to a major solar flare. When the sun has a particularly violent eruption, it can blast out a massive, fast-moving cloud of energetic protons. If a spacecraft on its way to Mars happens to be in the path of one of these storms, the crew could receive a very high dose of radiation in just a few hours. A dose high enough to cause acute radiation sickness. This means any long-haul spacecraft needs a storm shelter, a small, heavily shielded area where the crew can huddle together and wait for the solar storm to pass.
The problem is that shielding against this radiation, especially the incredibly high-energy GCRs, is extremely difficult. You might think that lining the spacecraft with thick plates of lead would be the best solution, but it's not that simple. Firstly, lead is incredibly heavy, and as we know from the rocket equation, launching heavy things is the hardest part. But more importantly, heavy materials can sometimes make the problem worse. When a superfast GCR particle, like an iron nucleus, hits a heavy atom, like lead, it can cause the lead atom to shatter. This creates a shower of secondary particles, like shrapnel from a grenade, which can end up causing more damage inside the ship than the single original particle would have. So, counterintuitively, the best shielding is made of lighter materials, specifically materials rich in hydrogen. Things like water or a type of plastic called polyethylene, which is basically just long chains of carbon and hydrogen. The idea is that the lightweight hydrogen nuclei are very good at absorbing the energy of the incoming particles without shattering into a shower of secondary radiation. So, the ideal spacecraft design might involve lining the crew quarters with the ship's water supply, using it for drinking, hygiene, and radiation shielding all at once. Even with the best designs, though, reducing the radiation dose to a safe level for a multi-year mission to Mars and back remains one of the biggest technical hurdles we face. It's an invisible danger that defines the very nature of interplanetary travel. While this constant, invisible rain of radiation is bombarding the ship from the outside, Another, more subtle and personal problem is at work on the astronauts' bodies on the inside: the complete and total lack of gravity. For months on end, the crew is in a state of constant free fall, what we call microgravity. And while floating around might look like the best part of being an astronaut, it takes a slow, steady, and rather comprehensive toll on a body that has spent its entire existence perfectly adapted to living under the constant, reassuring pull of Earth's gravity.
It's like the body's internal instruction manual, written over millions of years of evolution, suddenly has a whole chapter on how to deal with weight rendered completely obsolete. The body, being a very efficient machine, starts to adapt to this new, effortless environment in ways that are not so great if you ever plan on coming home. The first and most well-known effects of microgravity are on the bones and muscles. Here on Earth, every step you take, every time you lift an arm, every moment you spend just standing up, you are performing a tiny act of resistance against gravity. This constant stress is a signal to your bones to stay dense and strong, and to your muscles to maintain their mass. In space, with that constant stress completely gone, the body gets a very clear message. Oh, I guess we don't need all this heavy, energy-intensive bone and muscle anymore. Time to downsize. So, astronauts begin to lose bone mass at a rate of about 1 to 2% per month, particularly in their legs and spine. This is a condition that on Earth we call osteoporosis, and it happens much, much faster in space. At the same time, their muscles, especially the large load-bearing muscles in their legs and back, begin to atrophy from disuse. To fight this, astronauts on the International Space Station must exercise rigorously for about 2 hours every single day. They use special machines, like a treadmill with harnesses that hold them down, and a clever device called AirRed, Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, which uses vacuum cylinders to create resistance, allowing them to do things like squats and deadlifts in a weightless environment. Without this constant, dedicated exercise, an astronaut returning from a long mission would be incredibly weak, with bones as brittle as an elderly person's.
The strange effects of microgravity don't stop with the bones and muscles. The fluids in our bodies, our blood, the water in our cells, are also subject to gravity's pull. Here on Earth, gravity naturally pulls these fluids down towards our legs. Our circulatory system is designed to work against that pull, constantly pumping blood uphill to our heads. In space, without that downward pull, the fluids in the body redistribute themselves. They shift upwards into the torso and the head. This is what leads to the classic astronaut look, often called puffy face bird legs syndrome. Their faces look swollen and their sinuses feel constantly congested, as if they have a permanent head cold. At the same time, their legs become noticeably thinner as they lose up to a liter of fluid from each one. This fluid shift can even affect their sense of taste. Many astronauts report that food tastes bland in space, possibly because the congestion affects their sense of smell, which is a huge component of flavor. More recently, and more worryingly, doctors have discovered a problem called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, or SANS. It seems that this upward fluid shift can increase the pressure inside the skull. This pressure can then press on the back of the astronaut's eyeballs and on their optic nerves.
For many astronauts, this results in physical changes to the shape of their eyes and can cause their vision to become blurrier, a condition that is sometimes, but not always, reversible upon returning to Earth. Understanding and mitigating SANS is now a top priority for space medicine. It's another reminder that our bodies are exquisitely tuned to our home planet, and taking them out of that environment has all sorts of strange, cascading consequences.
And the strangeness continues. Our sense of balance, which is managed by the vestibular system in our inner ear, gets completely thrown for a loop. This system uses tiny moving crystals and fluid-filled canals to tell our brain which way is down. In space, with no down, the signals it sends become a confusing, nonsensical jumble. For the first few days of a mission, this can lead to a form of severe motion sickness, aptly named space adaptation sickness. The brain has to learn to ignore the confusing signals from the inner ear and rely almost entirely on vision for orientation. Even our immune systems seem to change in space, sometimes becoming less effective. Wounds can heal more slowly, and curiously, some bacteria seem to become more virulent or dangerous in a microgravity environment. The human body is an incredibly adaptable machine, but every adaptation it makes to the strangeness of space is a potential problem upon returning to the familiar gravity of Earth. The readaptation period can be just as challenging as the initial adaptation, involving dizziness, poor balance, and muscle weakness. So while our astronauts are being bombarded by invisible radiation and our bodies are slowly forgetting how to be terrestrial, they are also grappling with the immense, quiet, and deeply psychological problem of distance and time. Space is just so incredibly big. On a journey to Mars, for example, the crew would be traveling for 6 to 9 months each way. During this long, monotonous transit, they are confined to a living space likely no bigger than a large van or a small RV, along with a few other people they cannot get away from.
The most mind-bending aspect of this immense distance is the communication delay. We're used to instant communication here on Earth. But radio waves, though they travel at the speed of light, still take time to cross the vast distances of the solar system. The time delay for a message to travel between Earth and Mars can be anywhere from a short 4 minutes to a long 24 minutes, depending on where the two planets are in their orbits around the Sun. This means that a real-time, back-and-forth conversation is completely and utterly impossible. Imagine trying to have a conversation where you have to wait up to 48 minutes for a reply to a simple question. It's more like a very, very slow email or text message exchange. This has huge implications for the mission. If a critical problem arises, the crew can't just call mission control for instant advice. They have to describe the problem, send the message, and then wait, potentially for the better part of an hour, for a response to even begin to arrive. This means that a crew must be trained to be incredibly autonomous. They need to be able to diagnose and solve most problems on their own, using the resources they have on board, without immediate help
from the legion of experts back on Earth. This distance also creates a profound and unprecedented sense of isolation. On the International Space Station, astronauts are only 400 kilometers away. They can look out the window and see the beautiful, familiar curve of the Earth right there. A trip home, in a true emergency, is a matter of hours. On a trip to Mars, after the first few weeks of the journey, the Earth shrinks until it becomes just another bright, star-like point of light in the sky. All of humanity, everyone you've ever known, every place you've ever been, is contained in that single, distant, pale blue dot.
The psychological weight of that isolation, of being truly, fundamentally on your own, is a challenge that we are still trying to fully understand. Mission planners and psychologists study crews in analog environments on Earth, like remote Antarctic research stations or underwater habitats, to see how small groups of people behave in confinement and isolation for long periods. They've learned that things like crew compatibility, having a shared sense of humor, being resilient to monotony, and having strong, clear-headed leadership are just as important, if not more so, than any technical skill. The human mind is the most complex and delicate system on any spacecraft, and keeping it healthy is a paramount challenge. So let's say our astronauts have weathered the invisible storm of radiation, their bodies have adapted as best they can to the strange world of microgravity, and their minds have remained steady against the profound loneliness of the void. After their long, 9-month journey, their destination is finally in sight. Mars grows from a red star into a detailed, rust-colored world. Now they face what is arguably the most difficult, most technically complex, and most dangerous single part of the entire mission: landing. Getting down to the surface of another planet is incredibly, notoriously hard. This phase of a Mars mission has become famously known among NASA engineers as the 7 minutes of terror. This is because the entire process, from hitting the top of the Martian atmosphere to having the wheels touch the ground, takes about 7 minutes. And because of that light-speed communication delay we talked about, the entire sequence has to happen completely autonomously. The spacecraft has to perform a perfectly choreographed, high-speed ballet of maneuvers all by itself, with no help from mission control. By the time the engineers on Earth receive the signal that the landing has begun, the spacecraft has, in reality, either already landed safely or has tragically crashed and been destroyed. They are completely powerless to do anything but watch and wait for that final, crucial signal.
The reason landing on Mars is so much harder than landing on the Moon is because of its atmosphere. The Moon has no atmosphere to speak of, so you can just use rockets to slow yourself down and land directly on the surface, like the Apollo lunar module did. Earth, on the other hand, has a very thick, lovely atmosphere. It's like a big plush brake. You can use a heat shield to aerobrake, letting friction with the air do most of the work of slowing you down, and then deploy large parachutes for a gentle final descent. Mars, unfortunately, sits in a terrible middle ground. Its atmosphere is incredibly thin, less than 1% the density of Earth's, but it's still there. This creates the worst of both worlds. The atmosphere is just thick enough to generate immense destructive heat from friction as your spacecraft enters it at about 20,000 kilometers per hour. This means you need a heavy, robust heat shield to avoid burning up. But the atmosphere is far, far too thin for parachutes to be very effective. A parachute on Mars can only slow a landing craft down to a speed of a few hundred kilometers per hour, which is still much too fast to land safely. It's like trying to use a tiny handkerchief to stop a falling car. So, a Mars landing requires a complex and perfectly timed sequence of different braking methods. It all begins with the fiery entry. The spacecraft, protected by its heat shield, plows into the upper atmosphere. The friction and compression of the thin air create a superheated plasma fireball outside, with temperatures reaching over 1,000 degrees Celsius. The G-forces on the spacecraft are intense. This phase of aerodynamic braking does the vast majority of the work, scrubbing off about 90% of the vehicle's speed after the spacecraft has slowed down significantly. But while it is still traveling faster than the speed of sound, it's time for the parachute. A mortar fires, deploying a massive supersonic parachute. This is another incredibly difficult engineering feat. The parachute needs to be strong enough to survive opening in a supersonic flow without being shredded to pieces. This giant chute, perhaps 20 meters across, does its best to slow the craft down further, but as we said, it can only do so much in the thin Martian air. Once the parachute has slowed the lander as much as it can, it's cut away. At this point, the lander is still thousands of feet up and moving at a couple of 100 kilometers per hour. This is where the final and most complex stage of the landing begins: powered descent. The lander has to use its own retro rockets to slow down for a soft touchdown. For the recent large rovers, Curiosity and Perseverance, NASA designed an incredible and seemingly insane system called the Sky Crane. After the parachute is gone, the final descent stage becomes a rocket-powered hovercraft. It fires its engines, slowing down and steering towards a safe landing spot identified by its onboard computer. Then, as it hovers about 20 meters above the ground, it begins to lower the rover, which is tucked up beneath it, down to the surface on a set of long nylon cables. It's literally a rocket-powered crane lowering a car from the sky. This is done so that the powerful rocket engines don't kick up a huge cloud of dust and rocks that could damage the rover as it lands. The whole thing is an audacious, brilliant, and slightly bonkers piece of engineering. The Sky Crane gently lowers the rover until its wheels touch the Martian surface. The moment the onboard computer senses the touchdown, it severs the cables connecting it to the rover. With its mission complete, the Sky Crane, now free of its heavy payload, automatically flies off to a safe distance to perform its own intentional crash landing, ensuring it doesn't fall on top of the rover it just so carefully delivered. The entire sequence, from atmospheric entry to this final cut of the cables, takes those 7 terrifying autonomous minutes. And only then can the rover send a signal back to Earth that says, "I've arrived safely." So, congratulations are in order again. Our imaginary astronauts have landed. They've overcome the tyranny of the rocket equation, they've survived the radiation and the strange effects of microgravity, and they have successfully navigated the 7 minutes of terror to arrive safely on the surface of Mars. Now they can finally relax, right? Well, as you can probably guess, not at all. The destination itself is a whole new set of quiet, persistent, and deeply challenging problems. A place like Mars is a profoundly hostile environment. The moment you arrive, you are in a constant battle for survival. The first and most pervasive problem, something that gets into absolutely everything, is the dust. Martian dust, or regolith as it's properly called, is not like the soft, organic dust on Earth. It is incredibly fine, with particles as small as those in smoke. And it is, essentially, pulverized rock, making it very abrasive and sharp, like microscopic shards of glass. This dust gets into every crack and every mechanism, wearing down seals, clogging filters, and scratching lenses.
This fine dust is also a health hazard. It's so fine that it could easily be inhaled and could cause serious lung damage. Worse still, chemical analysis from our landers and rovers has shown that the Martian soil contains a significant amount of chemical salts called perchlorates. On Earth, perchlorates are known to be toxic to humans, affecting the thyroid gland. So preventing this fine, abrasive, and toxic dust from getting inside the astronaut's habitat would be a major and constant challenge. Every time an astronaut goes outside and comes back in, they would risk contaminating their living space. They would need sophisticated airlocks and procedures for dusting off their suits before re-entering. Then, of course, there's the air itself, or the lack thereof. The atmosphere our astronauts just so dramatically landed through is completely unbreathable. It's about 96% carbon dioxide, and the air pressure is incredibly low, less than 1% of Earth's. This low pressure is far too little to support liquid water on the surface. Any water would instantly boil away, even at freezing temperatures. And for a human, exposure to that low pressure without a spacesuit would be instantly fatal. The gases in your body would expand, and your own bodily fluids would boil. It's a harsh reality. A pressurized habitat and a reliable spacesuit are not just comforts, they are the only things standing between an astronaut and certain death. And, as we mentioned, this thin atmosphere offers very little protection from the sun's ultraviolet radiation and from the constant drizzle of galactic cosmic rays. An astronaut on the surface of Mars would be receiving a much higher radiation dose than is considered safe for workers in nuclear power plants on Earth. Their habitat would need to be heavily shielded, perhaps even buried under a thick layer of Martian soil to protect them during their long stay on the planet.
Then there is the problem of the cold. Mars is a frigid desert. Even though it can sometimes get surprisingly pleasant on a summer day at the equator, reaching temperatures of maybe 20 degrees Celsius or about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, the average temperature for the planet as a whole is a bone-chilling minus 60 degrees Celsius. And at night, or during the winter at the poles, temperatures can plummet to minus 125 degrees Celsius. Staying warm is a constant life-or-death battle. The astronauts would need a continuous and absolutely reliable source of power, most likely a small nuclear reactor, just to provide enough electricity to keep their habitat heated, their scientific instruments running, and their life support systems online. Finally, even the gravity itself is a potential long-term problem. Mars has about 38% the gravity of Earth. If you weigh 100 pounds on Earth, you would weigh only 38 pounds on Mars. This would make moving around feel easy and bouncy at first, but the big unanswered question is what the long-term effects of living in this partial gravity would be on the human body. Would 38% gravity be enough to prevent the severe bone loss and muscle atrophy we see in zero-G? Or would astronauts still experience a steady physical decline, just at a slower rate? Would they be able to safely readapt to Earth's full gravity after spending a year or more on Mars? We simply don't know. It's one of the biggest and most important medical questions for the future of human exploration. So, with such a relentlessly hostile environment, the dream of a long-term, self-sufficient Mars base relies on solving another huge and fascinating puzzle: living off the land. This is a concept known by the slightly jargony name of in situ resource utilization, or ISRU.
ISRU is a fancy way of saying you have to make what you need from what's available around you. You simply can't bring everything you need for a multi-year stay with you from Earth. It would be far too heavy and expensive to launch. To truly have a sustainable presence on Mars, future astronauts will have to be part prospector, part chemical engineer, and part cosmic farmer. The number one most critical resource they would need to find is water. We know there is a lot of water on Mars, but it's all frozen. There are huge ice caps at the poles, and we've discovered vast deposits of water ice buried just beneath the surface at mid-latitudes. The first step for any Mars base would be to land near one of these deposits. Then, astronauts, or more likely robotic systems, would need to mine this ice, dig it up, and bring it back to the habitat to be melted down. This water would, of course, be used for drinking and for growing food in greenhouses. But more importantly, it would be the primary feedstock for making other essential supplies. By running an electric current through water, a process called electrolysis, you can easily split it into its constituent parts, hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is, obviously, pretty useful. You need it to breathe inside the habitat. But you can also generate oxygen directly from the Martian atmosphere. The Perseverance rover, which is exploring Mars right now, has a brilliant experiment on board called MOXIE, which stands for Mars Oxygen In Situ Utilization Experiment. It's a little golden box that essentially breathes in the carbon dioxide from the Martian air and, through a chemical process, converts it into pure, breathable oxygen. It has been tested several times, and it works perfectly. It's a huge proof of concept for future missions.
The strange effects of microgravity don't stop with the bones and muscles. The fluids in our bodies, our blood, the water in our cells, are also subject to gravity's pull. Here on Earth, gravity naturally pulls these fluids down towards our legs. Our circulatory system is designed to work against that pull, constantly pumping blood uphill to our heads. In space, without that downward pull, the fluids in the body redistribute themselves. They shift upwards into the torso and the head. This is what leads to the classic astronaut look, often called puffy face bird legs syndrome. Their faces look swollen and their sinuses feel constantly congested, as if they have a permanent head cold. At the same time, their legs become noticeably thinner as they lose up to a liter of fluid from each one. This fluid shift can even affect their sense of taste. Many astronauts report that food tastes bland in space, possibly because the congestion affects their sense of smell, which is a huge component of flavor. More recently, and more worryingly, doctors have discovered a problem called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, or SANS. It seems that this upward fluid shift can increase the pressure inside the skull. This pressure can then press on the back of the astronaut's eyeballs and on their optic nerves. For many astronauts, this results in physical changes to the shape of their eyes and can cause their vision to become blurrier, a condition that is sometimes, but not always, reversible upon returning to Earth. Understanding and mitigating SANS is now a top priority for space medicine. It's another reminder that our bodies are exquisitely tuned to our home planet, and taking them out of that environment has all sorts of strange, cascading consequences.
To understand how to keep a crew happy and productive so far from home, mission planners and psychologists study people in what are called analog environments here on Earth. These are places that mimic the isolation and confinement of a space mission. Think of research crews spending the long, dark winter at a scientific base in Antarctica, or the crew of a nuclear submarine on a months-long patrol deep beneath the ocean. These studies have taught us a great deal about how small groups of people behave under extreme pressure. One predictable pattern they've noticed is something called the third quarter phenomenon. It seems that on many long-duration missions, whether in Antarctica or on the space station, the crew's morale tends to take a noticeable dip about 3/4 of the way through. The initial excitement has long worn off, and the end of the mission still feels very far away. This is often when conflicts can bubble to the surface and motivation can wane. Planning for this and having strategies to combat it is a crucial part of mission design. Another huge challenge is sensory monotony. Imagine waking up every single day for 3 years and seeing the same white walls, the same equipment, the same handful of faces, and outside the same unchanging red desert landscape. The lack of new sensory input can lead to boredom, a decline in mood, and reduced cognitive performance. To combat this, future habitats might include advanced virtual reality systems to allow astronauts to visit a forest or a beach, or spend time with their families back home. The simple act of growing plants in a small greenhouse could also be a huge psychological boon, providing fresh food, a splash of green color, and a connection to living, growing things. The psychology of habitat design is just as important as the engineering.
Ultimately, the most important factor is the crew itself. Selecting a group of people who are not only technically proficient but also have the right psychological makeup and can get along with each other under immense stress is perhaps the most critical task of all. A mission to Mars won't have a captain in the old naval sense. The crew will be a small team of highly specialized peers. What happens if the mission commander and the lead engineer have a fundamental disagreement about how to fix a critical problem? There's no higher authority to appeal to in real time. The crew must be able to resolve conflicts calmly and effectively on their own. The right stuff for a Mars astronaut isn't just about courage and skill, it's about humility, patience, and incredible emotional resilience. And what happens if, despite all this planning, someone gets sick? This brings us to the next great hurdle, the problem of space medicine. On Earth, if you have a serious medical emergency, a hospital is never too far away. In deep space, the crew is on its own. The spacecraft would have to be a miniature, self-contained hospital, and at least one of the astronauts would need to have extensive medical training, essentially serving as the crew's doctor, dentist, and surgeon all at once. The medical kits on the International Space Station are already incredibly comprehensive, able to treat everything from minor cuts to major trauma. But a Mars mission would be on another level. Imagine trying to diagnose a complex illness without access to a full hospital lab. Astronauts might have to rely on advanced new technologies like portable ultrasound devices that can be guided by experts on Earth, or tiny lab-on-a-chip systems that can perform blood tests. But even with a diagnosis, treatment is a challenge.